Good afternoon. My name's Dr Amy Iversen and I'm a consultant psychiatrist with an interest and passion for mentoring, and my company Håbe Consulting have the privilege of helping the Academy of Medical Sciences to run their mentoring scheme here. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes this afternoon talking to you about a very important topic, which is how to set up and run your first mentoring session. I often tell people that this first mentoring session is perhaps the most important one you'll have. So I'm going to give you lots of tips and ideas about how to make the most of it. So this slide shows the typical trajectory of a mentoring relationship. And you can see at the beginning there's this very important bit, which is where you build rapport between the mentor and the mentee. And then this also important bit where you're setting direction, deciding what's going to be the content of the sessions, what do you really want to get out of it, how will you know it's been a success. And then the mentoring relationship progresses and there's a period of intense learning and value, and eventually it winds up. But today what we're going to really focus on is that first bit of the graph on building rapport and setting direction. So the scheme that we run here at the Academy of Medical Sciences is very focused on you as the mentee. The mentee is encouraged to be highly proactive. The mentee is encouraged to set the agenda for the sessions and to set the general direction of the mentoring relationship. And what that means is, naturally leading on from that, is that the mentee is expected to set up and run the meetings themselves. And we've found it really helpful if the mentee can email a really short summary of what they want to get out of the mentoring meeting 24 hours before it goes ahead. We find that's really helpful because it helps you to focus your mind on what you're going to do the following day when you have the meeting, and also it helps the mentor to prepare a bit when they're thinking about how they're going to help you. Similarly, after the meeting, we found it really helpful if the mentee can email a short summary of what they've learned, what they've discovered, what were the key things that they really, discoveries that they made during the mentoring meeting, and send that to the mentor within around 72 hours of the session. So what about this first meeting then? What can you expect to get out of it? What should you aim to get out of it? Well, probably the most important thing that we want you to try and do is to establish rapport between the mentor and the mentee. And you might do that by discussing common ground, shared experiences, values that you both hold, or things that you both feel passionately about, such as hobbies. It's also important to talk about relevant social and career history, perhaps if that comes up, and we encourage mentors to be as honest as possible and disclose if appropriate. And it's also important to think about a little bit about focusing and prioritizing your personal objectives. It's important to do some contracting and setting down some ideas of how you're going to work together, and we'll cover that in a moment. But also important to think about your expectations. What is it you think you're going to get out of this relationship? Also for the mentor to tell you what is it that they think they're able to offer you. And obviously to give you some clarity and have an opportunity to answer any questions. At the end of the meeting, the key thing that differentiates a mentoring relationship from a cosy chat is that you will come up with some agreed action plans for the period between now and the next meeting. So let's focus in now a little bit more on the issue of building rapport, as this should take around half of that first meeting that you have. Rapport is really helpful because it helps mentors and mentees to get under the surface and talk about issues that may be difficult or personal. You're simply not going to do that if you're in a relationship where there isn't good rapport. So what are the components of rapport? And we've come up with the word affect to help you remember the components of rapport. And the first bit is about empathy, understanding each other's perspectives, being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Focus. Focus is so important. It's about being able to listen to each other, concentrate on each other, exclude other superfluous stuff that's going on, and be able to actually really give yourself completely over to the other person in terms of attention. It's also about flexibility, being open to each other's ideas, even if they're different from your own, and being willing to go with them. It's about empowerment, The session should help you, if it's successful, to take ownership of your goals. And congruence. Does the mentor kind of work alongside you? Do they see things from your perspective? Can they acknowledge and accept your goals, even if they're different from their own? And trust, very important component of rapport. Can they trust you? Can you trust your mentor? Will you both do what you say and what you've committed to? Here are a couple of questions that may help you when you begin to think about setting objectives for your mentoring relationship. And clear objectives and goals, don't worry, they may take a few sessions to emerge fully, but it does help if you can think about your objectives before a first meeting, and indeed before every meeting that you subsequently have. So here's a couple of questions just to kind of pique your interest. The first one is, what do you really want to be and do? A really difficult question, but a really important one. And then once you've decided that, well, what are you doing really well that's helping you to get there? What are you not doing so well that might potentially be preventing you from getting there? What will you do differently tomorrow to meet this challenge? And how could a mentor help you? That's a very, very important question, and something you need to give some thought to so that you can guide your mentor. Here's what I need from you. This is what I really need to understand further. How can you help me? Common themes of mentoring sessions. There's no right or wrong topic to discuss, so that's a key thing for you to know. Absolutely nothing is off limits unless it's been agreed before the session that it won't be discussed. But people often bring things like people stuff, dealing with a difficult boss or supervisor, or dealing with demanding and difficult colleagues, patients, collaborators in science. People also often need advice about how to get on and progress in their medical or academic career. So you might seek advice about how to build networks or how to advance within medicine or science. And lastly and importantly, people will often discuss issues to do with work-life balance and health. And they may also bring the discussion of family commitments and how to balance family commitments with their career. Sadly, many people will also be in a position to bring the issues of stress and burnout. And your mentor is well placed to advise and support on any of these issues. So let's turn now to how to set up this first session. And we believe that a clear working arrangement or agreement is really the foundation of a productive learning relationship. And the reason for that is because it frees you up, the mentor and the mentee, to work together and focus on learning rather than being distracted by extraneous questions or concerns. So you need to discuss at some point in that first session, what is your shared understanding of what mentoring is about? And you need to clarify basics and boundaries with each other. And these sorts of things are, for example, how often will you meet and for how long? Where will you meet? How long will the mentoring relationship last? What should each of you do if you don't get on? Perhaps you don't gel or click. What if it's not working out? What's the arrangements for cancellations? Are there any situations in which the mentor would not be able to maintain confidentiality? Will notes be kept? Will you identify yourself as a mentor or a mentee if you meet socially or at a committee or conference? And what about if your mentor finds themselves on a peer review or interview panel? Will they declare a conflict of interest? At the end of each session, it's really important to tell your mentor what's been helpful and what hasn't. And this is difficult for us. It's difficult to be kind of candid and honest with someone that's more senior, but it's only in being honest in this way that the mentor can flex and develop in the way that they work with you. You'll only have a few mentoring sessions scattered throughout the year. You need to make them as effective as possible by monitoring and feeding back to one another. It's also important to suggest any ways that you think that you could improve the sessions or work better together, and make sure you have the next session in the diary, and ideally the next 2 or 3 sessions. And this avoids a lag developing if a meeting has to be postponed. The between session work we've already discussed briefly, but it includes summarising the session and your agreed action plans in an email, and ensuring that there is something to refer back to at the next session. It's also, of course, important that you don't just write down what you're going to do, but that you do commit to carrying out your action plan between one session and the next. A good mentoring meeting should have a clear agenda. It could be focused on the issues and needs to have got under the surface. It should have stretched you both. Progress has to have been recognised. A clear strategy for next steps needs to have been agreed. And you should have both learned something, and it should be really enjoyable. This should be a real highlight of your week. And if it's not, it probably means that the match between you and your mentor is not good. I'm going to end there because we finished the webinar, but I'm now very happy to take questions from those watching live on the feed, or alternatively, we also have some questions that the team here have prepared. So in order to ask the questions, you need to use the web chat box by logging in, or via Twitter. You can tweet your questions. So we'll start off with the first question, which is, if I can't meet with my mentor face-to-face often, should I include Skype or phone calls in my mentoring contract? Absolutely. So Skype and telephone calls work really, really well for mentoring. It's usually helpful if you can have a first session set up face-to-face, because it's really important for the rapport building aspect of the relationship. But once you've got to know each other a little bit, Skype's excellent, and it's really good for female academics and scientists, because it does allow you to go home, put the kids to bed, and then perhaps have a Skype conversation later on in the evening. I should say not just female academics, anybody that has childcare responsibilities, but it does give you that flexibility. It's a little bit more technically challenging, and if I'm honest with you, I have sometimes found that Skype sessions tend to be cut short sometimes by technical difficulties, but it can be very effective if you're quite IT savvy. So I've got another question here which asks, is there a template contract that I can use to get started with my mentor if I'm not quite sure how I should set it up with them? And the answer is that there are lots and lots of really good resources available on the Academy of Medical Sciences website, and we're going to give you a link to that website at the end of this webinar. So we have a sample contract available on that website, but you can also contact the staff of the Academy Mentoring Office, who are very happy to help and guide you. And of course, it's up to you whether you decide to have a formal contract or whether you just decide to agree informally. I would suggest that if you do decide to go the informal route, that you just put down your agreement in an email to each other, and just literally in 5 minutes sort of say, look, we met, this is what we decided, we're going to meet 4 times a year, we're going to try and meet for an hour and a half, between sessions we're going to have some email contact, just so that there's a little degree of formality to it, so that there's some sense of, you know, that there has been an agreement between the two of you. So how often should I aim to meet with my mentor is another question. Is there an ideal number of meetings? Well, we have a bit of research that can help us with this, and what we know is that if you meet with your mentor less than 4 times a year, it's very unlikely you're going to develop that kind of depth of rapport that you need in order to kind of take difficult, sensitive, complex issues along. So the depth of the kind of conversation that you're going to get into is necessarily probably a little bit limited. So we're going to suggest that you try and meet with your mentor between 4 and 6 times a year. We've also found that if you aim for 6 times, you'll meet 4, and if you aim for 4 times, you'll meet 2. So if you kind of overestimate how often you should meet, you'll probably end up kind of at the perfect level. Okay, is there another question? Okay. How long should we set aside for the first meeting? Well, the first meeting is a bit different from subsequent meetings because you have to do all that boring contracting stuff and kind of planning exactly how you're going to work together in terms of logistics. So what I normally suggest is that you do set aside an hour and a half, and you spend the first 45 minutes having a really good chat, building rapport, talking about common experiences, hobbies, interests, people you know, trying to get a sense of the other person, their values, you know, what are they like, what are they about. And then the second 45 minutes, you can do all that kind of nitty-gritty, detailed stuff about where you're going to meet, how you're going to meet, and so on, and make sure that that gets done in the first meeting and got out the way, really. Another question is, what do I do if my mentor can't meet and I need some advice kind of immediately? Should I ask for an emergency meeting to be included in the mentoring contract? I think that's a really good suggestion. I often do allow my mentees to have a kind of emergency red button that they can press if everything goes pear-shaped at work. And it is important probably to discuss that ahead of the emergency. It's sometimes quite difficult to contact a mentor out of the blue and say, look, I'm really struggling. Can I have a session right now? But if it's been agreed with them that you can reach out to them, they'll normally let you know if they're happy to be called, and they may give you a mobile number or provide a personal email so that you can reach them. Most mentors are happy to do that as long as they know they're not going to have to do it every week. Got another question here. If we don't meet in the office, where can I meet my mentor? And I've got several suggestions there. And in fact, sometimes it works better if you don't meet your mentor in their office. Sometimes when you meet the mentor in their office, there are the trappings of hierarchy all around, the big leather chair, the certificates on the wall. And that may be an environment where they're contacted by their secretary or their juniors walking in. Sometimes it's better to meet in a neutral location which has no particular kind of connection to either of you. So you can rent a room often. Sometimes if it's a clinical setting, you can use an outpatients department. There's usually a place that you can find. Alternatives would include using a cafe. We usually encourage mentors and mentees not to meet in bars because alcohol and mentoring don't really mix very well. But you could meet in a cafe or restaurant. Or alternatively, sometimes mentors and mentees choose to meet at the mentor's home. And if that's acceptable to you and you're comfortable with that, then that's fine. Because it's not a clinical relationship. It's an informal partnership, adult to adult. So it's fine if you want to meet in that sort of setting. You said that building rapport and setting up rules is important in the first meeting. But also, should I aim to start talking about my issues? Absolutely. And of course, you're going to want to do that because it's your first mentoring session. You're not going to want the whole session taken up with the kind of practicalities of how you're going to meet and so on. So some of that can be done before a first session. Do you remember I mentioned to you that you can do that little bit of thinking that you send to your mentor ahead of a first session where you can actually sort of say, look, this is what I want to get out of this relationship. This is how I'll know it's been successful. And the 5 questions that are in this slide deck, well, what do I want to be and do, etc., are perhaps a helpful starting point for kind of stimulating some of that thinking for you. But obviously your mentor's going to help and facilitate that for you when you meet them as well. Got another question here. How important is it to have a mentor working within the same field to have an effective relationship? That's the million-dollar question. We often find that mentees want to have a mentor who works in the same field of them. They feel comfortable with that. They feel that perhaps that's the only person that's going to be able to give them the right kind of technical advice about their career. But what we have found is that there's something enormously liberating about being mentored from someone who isn't in your field. So we've had some very successful partnerships of academics, non-clinical academics with clinical academics. And I don't know what it is, but perhaps because they're not involved so directly in your kind of your career trajectory, they're able to give you a sort of, 36,000 foot view. They can give you a perspective that perhaps you and your mentors from within your institution don't have. Because remember, you're not going to them for technical advice. You're not going to them about, right, what should I do? You're going to them to provide a reflective space where they can ask questions that can help you to discover your own solutions. And that's much more likely to happen in a way if you're not always thinking that they're going to come up with the answer, if you're not always, kind of imagining that they perhaps know what you should do. Do I have any other questions? No. Okay. So the webinar is now finishing. We have enormous amounts of resources available for you on our website. We are always happy to talk and help, and we would welcome your emails or phone calls. So please do get in touch if there's anything further that we can assist you with, and we wish you the best of luck in your mentoring relationships.
Well done.
Yeah.
Kerry, do you want to put up on chat the website link as well? So just that we can
How many people were on?
Sorry, it's already up.